I appreciate the folks coming through. So hopefully you guys can see my screen and you can hear my voice. And what we're going to do today is kind of jump right into the world of Linux. So if you guys have questions or challenges from previous assignments, just kind of put them on the table for the moment. Prepare them in a nice written way, and you may submit them or such, or just kind of hang tight. What we're going to do is go through this Linux intro to Linux and kind of think about the history, think about the uses, and then we'll try to dive right into one of the assignments, right? So let's do this. And then if you cannot see my screen, let me know, or if you cannot hear my audio, can't hear my audio, then we're in trouble because he won't really be able to tell me. All right, so let's do this. All right, so we're taking a look at Linux and Linux primarily on the desktop in this kind of context that we'll be talking about it, similar to how we've looked at the Windows environment. We'll hold off for the Mac setup, because the Mac is essentially a Linux box packaged up very nicely. Right. All right, so we're taking a look at describing Linux and its origins, list the benefits and drawbacks, set, acquire, and install distribution of Linux for the desktop. Now that one we'll already have a Linux install waiting for us. Identify certain features and utilities and Linux GUI, things that you can customize, and how you perform basic tasks. Also demonstrate the use of shell commands, command line environments, and take a look at how we can add users and secure those users, assigning passwords and checking out file permissions. So why learn Linux? What's the importance of it? What's the reason for it? Well, it will be very beneficial. It is very beneficial for your job skill set. So, obviously we're fully aware that Windows kind of has a broad-based lock on the desktop and office spaces, right? So in general, desktops are a Windows world, right? For large offices, large companies, and such, they're primarily on Windows. It's going to shift in some environments. Let's say a creative company that does design or music or audio or something like that. That's their specialty. There may be a lot of Mac type environments, but again, still not generally a Linux based environment, right? So therefore your skill set, the bulk of who's out there as far as administrators go, and what's useful, what people think is the number one operating system that they need to learn, because hey, every office has one, right? A Windows machine, right? Well, the reason why Linux can be so powerful is that Linux, operates heavily on the web and heavily in the background, right? So anything that is cloud-based, web-based, apps, websites, APIs stuff, programming, all those things, they thrive in a Linux world. So your skill set will be greatly improved, and there are a whole host of companies and opportunities within companies, whether they are Windows-based or Mac-based or Linux-based, or have a mixture of all of them, right? Your skill set in Linux will come in handy. Evolution of Linux. Kind of think of what started Linux, where it come from, who and why. Ken Thompson, a gentleman that worked at Bell Labs, he wrote a precursor to the Unix system, right? So Unix is a system that Linux is based off of. Right? So Bell Labs, you know, those guys, that's the AT&T folks. You know, they were once the the dominant telecom, tech, networking, you know, all things technology. You know, AT&T, Bell Labs was, you know, a early on innovator, right? They've been keeping us connected to networks for a really long time. And there was a division called Bell Labs, and they come up with a lot of powerful research, a lot of powerful products over the years. And one of them, based on this gentleman's skill and ability, Ken Thompson, he wrote a precursor to Unix, right? So just a basic part of an operating system that can help him complete whatever his job was at the time, right? So that's in the 70s, and then in the 80s, a community called GNU, or New, depending on who you ask, right? GNU, that group, that organization, was created to develop a free Unix-like operating system. So again, Unix was kind of one of the first operating systems that could work across different platforms, right? So, you know, you might have had an IBM, a DEC company, maybe HP potentially, and maybe a few others, Minix, and a few other programs that existed, or operating systems or hardware setups that existed. And Unix was one of the first, you know, kind of systems that could, operating systems that could ride on and work with almost whatever the underlying hardware was. So this organization was created to develop a free system that was similar to Unix. In '88, licenses from the OSF, Open System Foundation, they were able to get the licensing from Unix, which was the, you know, kind of that original operating system that was portable and able to be used on different types of hardwares. Parts of that code became open source, right? So they said, hey, you know, you guys get down to the source code, you can use it, it's freely available. You know, if you have the skill set to come and grab it and develop on it, right? You know, build it, do whatever you want with it, right? So in 91, so 88 to 91, not that long of a distance of time, but a gentleman named Linus Torvalds began writing an open source version of a Unix-like operating system. So, you know, parts of Unix was open source, and other parts were still proprietary, and, you know, but it kind of operated as if it was already open source. You know, that's the thing, right? You know, people were using it, people had access to it, but, you know, they technically were, you know, probably using parts that were parts of the software, parts of the coding that was still under a license, right? So this gentleman, you know, Linus Torvalds, started writing this Unix-like operating system and ended up calling it Linux, kind of based on his name, right? And it became very popular. It was, you know, it was definitely free. It was open source. People were able to start to download this and install it in different environments and play with it and test it and see how it worked, why it didn't work, what was good, what was bad. So the, you know, true core of what the Linux operating system came up with was its kernel, right? And so the kernel is kind of that nugget that is the, you know, kind of heart or brain of the system, whatever you want to look at it. It handles resources, it handles memory management, it handles interacting with the hardware, RAM, and ROM, and, you know, all those things that are core and needed within the system. In general, Linux has benefited from and has been probably the top, sole, main, largest open source project that's out there, right? So it may it probably still leads Bitcoin, but Bitcoin will be coming up as probably the second most popular completely open source network, right? But Linux as a operating system itself, it has contributed to a growing open source movement. And people feel like, hey, software should be free, and we should have access to it. And hey, if I write some program, I want the world to have access to it. It can be tested much faster. It can be broken and fixed and repaired. People can contribute from multiple sources. So there's a whole world that kind of supports that. And then many organizations, many proprietary type organizations, such as now Microsoft, Apple, HP, Intel, Dell, whoever else, right? All these major Fortune 500 companies, tech companies, and otherwise, now say, hey, look, we will support, they will contribute to various Linux organizations and open source groups that are building this stuff, right? But it's primarily voluntary, right? With the organization of it, there are funds that are made available. Companies will donate and contribute. And again, I mentioned Microsoft. They, for a long time, were totally against anything open source, at least promoting or really acknowledging it. But in the past few years, they have kind of turned around and capitulated some and have now joined in a lot of the open source stuff. If you don't know about GitHub, GitHub is a website where people will post software and they'll put up a program, and it's made freely available to the world, and people can see that software, that code, that app that someone built, and they can go check it, download it, fork it, copy it basically, and build on top of it, create their own thing. Usually the goal is just to kind of leave it as open source though, right? So if it's sold later on, meaning you're selling things, you're making money off of this thing, still the core of the software should be open source, right? So Microsoft ended up purchasing GitHub, and another kind of funny little caveat or tricky little caveat is Git, the Git, actual software that runs that GitHub, is another open source software that was developed by the same guy, Linus Torvalds, right? So the same Linux guy built another program called Git, and it's turned into GitHub and a whole bunch of other Gits, right? You just search out Git, and it's a way of updating software, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Open source Apache HTTP server, written for Unix, and runs very well on a Linux setup. So that's there because almost every website that you encounter or engage in, that you see, that you run across, when you're searching the web, it's probably running off a open source server such as Apache. Right? So Apache software is a web browser, and it's very stable, very capable, and it is robust, right? So if you were going to build a website, and you needed to get a domain name and get some server space somewhere, and launch a web browser, a web hosting platform, well, you would probably be using a Linux-based system. Some benefits: many distributions are free. So distributions is kind of a term that is unique, maybe not unique to Linux, but it's the primary way they describe all the different versions, right? Because it is a free open source software, and over the years it has matured a lot. Because it is widely available, there are people that have taken core free elements and the different software that's kind of built on top of it, and they have shared it amongst themselves, their groups, and built on top of it, made their own distributions. So meaning that um, you could have your own operating system, right? The Hawk operating system, and it could be filled with whatever software you want to put on it, right? And made it widely available. People could get it, download it, and install it and use it, right? And you're running an open source company that says, hey, software is freely available. Okay? Tends to run very well on old equipment. Um, it is generally thought of to be a fast system as compared to let's say, Windows machine. Um, the GUI environment is completely optional within Linux under most systems, meaning that you can run it completely from a command line and still make all the tools and services that you require for your environment, make them available for anybody that does have a desktop and or is accessing this system through the web, a web browser or such. So it's pretty flexible in that from that perspective. Stable, secure, and of course open source, meaning freely available. This is a quick snapshot of a environment, a desktop environment, a GUI environment, and this one is from a desktop maker, right? So a company called KDE or a system called KDE is what this GUI environment looks like. You see, it looks, maybe similar to like a Windows setup. Icons are obviously different, the shaping and layout slightly different, but a lot of similarities, right? So, you aren't really trading anything off, particularly in today's environment, right? Most of the apps that you use, let's say like some kind of office setup where you have email and writing documents, a Word document, maybe trying to create PDF files or any kind of word processing or spreadsheets, presentation. Any of those things are available in a Linux environment. So gone are the days where things are only made for Windows or things are only made for Mac. There are anything you can imagine from a Windows or Mac setup. There's probably some equivalent version that's available in a Linux setup, and it's most likely free. All right, so this first one here was a KDE environment that was built on a Red Hat Fedora project base. And so you'll come to learn or come to understand there's generally thought of as kind of two camps or two sides of this Linux operating system, particularly for the desktop. You have one, the Fedora, which is the free and open source version of a Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Red Hat is a company that figured out a way to say, hey, we'll give you the software for free, but we'll charge you for the servicing and customization and additional security features and integration services. So they offered the software free. Hey, you can have the operating system, no problem. Just download it. Here you go. And then, if you want our expertise in consulting on this and helping you to integrate it into your Windows environment, we will charge you a fee, right? So this is one of the desktop environments that's available, and it's primarily on the KDE setup, but it can be on this one as well. This is Ubuntu. Very unique Linux operating system. It is from the other camp, right? So most things you'll hear, it's either a Red Hat base and Red Hat Fedora based type system, or it's either Debian or Ubuntu system, and that's kind of the other side, right? And so they just kind of take a different approach for a couple of elements, but they're essentially the same. Many of the core commands will work on either platform. There are some differences between them. This is how their desktop looks in that setup. and it works, very well. And you're able to do everything and anything that you want to do with a Windows-based system or a Mac type of system. You can do it right with this. Additional benefits: Linux can have a GUI. So it says can have a GUI, and that's a something to kind of keep in mind, right? Because it doesn't have to have a GUI. I mean, this could all be done in the command line. Obviously a little more challenging, but if you don't need those, if you don't need all the extra kind of graphics and additional processing that a desktop may require, then operating it completely from the command line without a GUI, or with the GUI, kind of in dormant, just kind of laying there, not utilizing any additional resources, you're able to kind of speed up other processes, right? So if this was a server, let's say a media server, and you've got, 10,000 movies on it, and it's just there to serve up those movies. You have some other interface where it will pull from this machine and then send that info to a device, or display it on the internet, or whatever you decide to do. You don't need a GUI environment for that, right? So this is kind of a layout and some of the different features, where things are at. Notifications here. You get some notifications and menus. It's another menu bar here. The dock is along the side, as opposed to on Windows or even a Mac. I tend to have it at the bottom. Some of the drawbacks. What are the challenges? Why is it? What are the things that may be hindering it, holding it back? One of the number ones they mention here, and I'll say this is probably true. It's the lack of centralized support, because Linux is the open source, essentially decentralized setup. It's an operating system that doesn't require permissions to run it, right? From my understanding, if you try to buy a version of Windows 10, and obviously in the past, Windows 7, 8, and whatever else you decided to buy for Windows, they wanted to make sure that you registered that software. You needed a key, and you need this, and you need that. Well, Linux isn't that, right? So it is decentralized, meaning that anybody can have it, anybody can run one. You can put it on almost any, minimal type hardware, and it tends to work if you pick the right setup. So, with that, because of that, there's no one company that you can call, right? So if you decided to download and install a version of Linux, and you completely, messed up the install, and turned your machine into a brick, and you're like, what did I do? And who do I call? You are, pretty much short. You can obviously reach out online through another machine, hopefully, that you have access to, and then you can maybe find answers to your problems. But because there's no centralized source, all the software that's provided to you from whoever is always comes with a disclaimer that says, "Hey, this is free and open source software, and they won't be held to any kind of liabilities of what do you do with this software." Because there can be multiple GUI environments and GUI setups, it can be confusing, right? If you buy a Windows machine, you know what to expect. You know what the Windows layout looks like. If you bought one today and you went to buy one tomorrow, they're going to be essentially the same, right? Maybe there's an update to it, but whatever it is, probably going to be a very similar setup and a version that is widely available. And you don't have to worry about what kind of desktop or how your desktop should behave or anything like that, right? Well, Linux has multiple desktops. You can have some that are super lightweight, where they only give you kind of minimal graphics and minimal functionality, but super lightweight, and still click around and get through things easy. But you don't have the bloat of a heavy duty operating system. Maybe it's not designed for something to be pretty. It's just designed to get it to work. And so that having multiple environments, KDE or GNU or XFCE or whatever else, other GUI environment you want to set up, it can be daunting from time to time, or just kind of navigating if you had to use different systems for some reason. Limited software selection. I don't really support that necessarily. There's generally a available solution that runs in Linux that would be available in Windows or Mac type of setup. So I only think the software is too limited, but it may not be as it may not be as widely used as something that you would find in a Windows environment. So potentially you may run into things like file formats or a version of this working on a Linux machine and then trying to get the finished product onto some Windows machine. And there can be some challenges with that. They're not too much anymore, but it definitely can happen. Limited hardware support. Another one that is a kind of a true statement in that most manufacturers of the hardware, they do not build their machines to work specifically for Linux. Again, if you have an HP and you bought it with an operating system already on it, it's probably going to be Windows. If you bought it without an operating system, it's probably going to be set up where it will accept Windows super easy. And most likely it will accept a Linux version as well. But if it doesn't, or there's some kind of problem with that connection and that setup, well, you're kind of again off on your own, right? So these things can be a challenge. And then finally, they have the complexity, and I think that is a true issue, or can be, in that it can be pretty complex. There's a lot of hoops to jump through to try to figure these things out, and what works best, what's your favorite environment, which one does what for you. So it can be overwhelming and confusing. So how do you figure out, let me pick out the Linux desktop, right? Which version of Linux should I use? And with that, there's so many distributions that are available. What you would want to do is try to pick one, select one that meets and matches your needs. So, let's say if you do need a desktop, maybe you want a machine for a school-age child, and you want that machine to be, able to handle general web browser interaction, right? So you want to have Chrome on it, and you want to have availability of word processing, some kind of document software. Maybe you want to have some kind of spreadsheets. Maybe you want to have a couple of programming, tutorials or programming applications installed. And so you can build one out that kind of meets your needs, right? There are ones out there that are specifically designed for, let's say, cybersecurity, right? So there's a version called Kali Linux, Kali, Kali Linux. And these guys put together, just took a version of Linux and said, oh, there's all these different tools that are available, these exploit tools, right? So things like password hackers or cross-scripting, software, or other kinds of penetration testing tools, right? Generally, they may be spread across in, multiple different, available in multiple different places, or you have to go and collect all these things and download them and have them on your machine, and have the wherewithal to kind of use that at one machine to gain clients or push forward some other initiative, right? Well, what these guys of the Kali Linux group, what these guys did was create a operating system that has pretty much all the tools that are there, that you need. And they made it in a really cool way. There was one period of time where it's available as a live image, that you see on this list here. And what that is a whole operating system on a CD-ROM drive or a DVD type of drive. And you could pop that into a desktop or laptop that had a DVD drive, right? And you reboot the machine, and it would boot up, and your Windows software would still kind of live there. It just kind of isn't running, or it's running. It's not the main part that you're interacting with. You start to interact with this disk, right? And so this CD-ROM spins, and you have a whole new operating system. And you can use it and the tools that are in it to do things like maybe recover something from a machine that has been destroyed or hacked or something. It's locked up. You may be able to use it for troubleshooting networking problems and networking issues. You could use it for just a simple tests, just trying to run things and test your network, play around with software, whatever you chose to do, right? So it's pretty cool. And Ubuntu or Fedora or many other versions that do exist. A website that I'll tell you guys to go to. I'll drop it in the chat. Let me make sure I know what it is. I know it's DistroWatch, but I can't remember if it's Palm or Org. Yeah, it is. So DistroWatch.com. Let's see if I can drop it in the chat. Thanks to everyone who started. So it's in the chat. It's a link out to DistroWatch, DistroWatch.com. And if you do navigate your way out here, let's, I'll just put it over here. So this is DistroWatch. Again, it's a resource that will kind of list. You see off here to the right, kind of the rankings of various Linux distributions, like who's the most popular in this space nowadays. It's MX Linux. The second one is Manjaro, Mint, Debian, Hop, Ubuntu, Debian, Elementary, Fedora, so on and on and on and on. So these are generally, just ones that are freely available that whoever wants access has access to. And this list changes over time. At different points, you would have seen Ubuntu be number one for a really long time. You've seen Mint there. You've seen Fedora there. And just kind of know, like, these, every one of these are slightly different. Right? What they offer, the ease of use, how the layout looks, what the GUI is set up as, there's differences. But these guys will tell you every time there's a new one released, kind of what kind of updates are with it. Find more details. So in this case, this one, UBports. It's a community developed fork of Ubuntu Touch operating system for mobile devices. All right, so Ubuntu, it's a version of Linux, obviously, and these guys said, "Oh, hey, I like that. We'll make a version of it, right?" And maybe they have a few additional features inside. Maybe they have some things that are easier. And so this will be for a very kind of specific use. This works. But all these things are available to anyone and whoever wants to play around with and experiment, test them, download them, solve them on a machine. You can do things like this EasyNAS, which is a network attached storage. Not the rapper NAS. network attached storage. And so this talks a bit about these guys and all the different versions that they've had. And what did they say? Been out since 2016, I guess here, 2016, 17, 18, 21. Yeah, so, and with some of these types of softwares, like this one, again, it's a network attached storage. You see, they haven't had that many versions of it, and they are once a year, and then they take a couple years off. Certain software like this, if you're just running it for this one purpose, some kind of network attached storage where you have resources that sit on it, and you can easily or customize how to pull the data off or how to display that data. These are kind of tools that don't change a whole lot or need changing a whole lot. They probably have consistent updates to them. They've probably done a refresh for things like how the GUI environment looks or things along that. So let's see. All right, so explore this site and just kind of check things out. Again, you can find out about any of these guys. Ubuntu, Ubuntu. We'll talk a bit about who these guys are, what their mission is, and it's a very unique story. So Ubuntu is I want to say it's a key Swahili African term, and it's a term that means I am because you are, or something similar to that. And it is a term that's used to kind of show unity and sharing and collective work and community work and all these things, right? So the gentleman who started this company, Ubuntu, was he got very wealthy during the dot-com bubble time frame. So late 90s, early 2000s, he had a company or a couple of companies, and he ended up selling them for somewhere around 300 million, I think it was. Could be wrong on that. You just have to do your own research to verify. A gentleman was from South Africa, I believe. But anyway, he started this company, and he would distribute Ubuntu, this version of Linux, right, for free. They used to actually, you could go to their website. Let's see, I don't know, I doubt if they do this anymore. You used to be able to, it's probably, it's a really long time ago when they were doing this, but these guys would have DVDs readily available for you to order, and they were free, right? So they were doing like e-commerce. This is in probably 2007, 6, between 2006 and 7 time frame probably was a time frame where they were like giving out these DVDs of this operating system, and they had like 3 or 4 versions, and you just fill out a form and they'd send it out to you, and it would maybe take 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get there, right? But you would have a operating system for free. So if you had an old machine, an old computer, you could utilize this, the Ubuntu, one of their distributions, and install it. Now, obviously, high-speed internet is readily available all over the world. Still, some places do not have the internet, but it is generally thought of to be widespread. So you would come out here and you could just download it. Right? You could download the however many gig size of software that it is, download it to your machine, and create an ISO file, and you can install it on a virtual machine, or install it on your own machine, or whatever you want to do. And you'll see here, these guys are an open source company. Ubuntu is. They do have a parent company called Canonical, and those guys are not open source. Right? So you'll probably get where I'm going with this, right? So many folks will um, do things with open source software, and then they will provide some kind of servicing on top of it, right? And these are some of their partners, some of the people that support them, probably some of the people that um, contribute to this open source project. Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, AT&T, Google Cloud, Netflix. All these guys participate. CentOS is another open source project that exists. So yeah, so I think that's all I really wanted to touch on with that kind of initial introduction and particular website that you guys should go check out and explore, check out the different communities that exist around some of these softwares and why they're either really popular or not so popular. If you want to install Linux or use it as in a live, what's called a live image, connect to the distribution site, download it, save the ISO file, create a bootable disk, test the disk by rebooting, making sure that your machine boots up to that disk, and then you can you can install it onto the hard drive or let it run live from the machine. Everything needs updates. Updates in Linux are, if it's done often, it's not too painful. But because it is an open source setup and open source software, and there's a lot of open source software that runs on top of this open source software, things get updated all the time, and you should have a general or regular type of routine of updating a machine that may use certain services. Right? As it stands in many server type environments, those updates are kind of handled not on an automatic basis or not automatically based on what the computer says, right? There may be some news that drives updates or modifications or changes or security patches, things that happen. And as an administrator, you kind of make those choices as you go. Distribution can have many updates, and sometimes it can be very time consuming. Installing using a live image. So, to tell you, hey, there's new software available. Sometimes they'll tell you it's maybe a full kind of version update, upgrade, and other times it's just whatever software that's there has been updated, and this allows you to kind of update all those things at one time. There was a time with the Windows setup where you didn't necessarily have to be a specific user, right? You could just log in as the general user that's assigned to the machine when you first started up, or the guest account. In Linux, it always has to be a logged on user that is a user in the system, right? Windows is like that now too. So it's not much difference with that nowadays, but it used to be by being logged in as a specific user that is recognized on the system, you would have, as a system administrator, have far more control over what that user can do and what's available to them, right? And so more control exists and it keeps a more secure system. So pass on this. General login screen, nothing too serious there. Again, this is a Ubuntu setup. Just kind of highlight some of those different areas within that GUI environment. Have a launcher, similar to the start button on a Windows machine, and whatever you need, it is generally available to you. Right? So web browser, mail client, files, music player, Office tools, right? So all your Office stuff in LibreOffice. Ubuntu's update software, help if you need it, a link directly to Amazon, whatever else, right? You can take screenshots. There's a screenshot tool built in, so you can just search for things and they should pop up here. So every user that's created, or every user that you want to create in a GUI environment, will have themselves a home directory, similar to the directory that you have in Windows, where you have your documents, your downloads, your pictures, and all these different folder directories that exist. User has a home directory. User has full control of home directory. User cannot make changes in other directories. So you cannot control someone else's stuff, right? Paths describe location of a file or directory. Very similar in the Windows environment, right? Its path is very important of where something exists. As opposed to a Windows environment, Linux utilizes a / right? So it's the I guess the question mark on your standard keyboard, right next to the shift button. So it's the / and a lot of Windows setups you have the / right? So first / is considered the root. So this is like the core starting point of operating system, right? So root, and then everything else is below it, right? Or above it, however you want to, visualize it and think of it. And if it's the root, I tend to think of it as the bottom of everything, and everything else grows up above it, right? And so if you were to kill or destroy the root, the / that root account, the account of the system, you would destroy all other things that are on that system. Subsequent / separate the various directories. And something that's very key that is maybe a hard concept for some to take in, and others to say, oh yeah, I understand that. Well, everything is considered a file in Linux, right? So where, let's say on a Windows machine, maybe you have something that's a .dll file, right? Or a .exe file, right? If you try to open up a .exe file and look at it, you're going to get a bunch of garbled junk on the screen, right? In Linux, not so much, right? You can get to the core of almost everything, right? So something that is a application or a program that runs in the background within Linux, you can open it up and you can generally modify it, right? You can modify the configuration file of things, because part of that open source nature says, hey, you should be able to have access to this, this program and what it does. And if you want to change how it works, feel free to go ahead and do it. So here's some of the default directories that you'll see. Again, the / is the root. You'll have bin, that's where a lot of the commands exist. Boot, helps you boot up the system. Dev, for the physical devices that are maybe connected, USB or a memory, some kind of memory card that you plug in, or anything along those lines. Happen there. etc. Configuration files, home directories for all the users. So where you may have on the Windows system, you'll have C : users, / users. Here you'll have just the / and then home, and then below home are all your users, right? Libraries, lib, mount, for adding and removing devices. OPT, processes, the root directory, home directory for the root account. SBIN, system commands, binary files, temporary files, secondary hierarchy for users, USR. Var, various variable data. Several directories contain variable type of data. You can set up things for automatic updates if you want. Generally not really something that's done in the Linux box. You're not really going for these automatic updates, but it could be in a desktop environment. Maybe you choose to do that. And again, some of the settings for controlling and modifying your machine. You've got Bluetooth setups and connections, and all these things here, networking devices, and so on. So everything you can imagine in Windows setup is available in a Linux setup. You can move things around. I think we'll probably kind of stop here with some of this description. Let you guys get a little break, and we'll jump back to this. And if you have questions, you can dive into some of those. And then if not, we will jump into trying to do some of the stuff from the assignments. But yeah, so this is modifying the desktop, but this is for the Ubuntu environment, and we'll be running some tests and doing some things on a Fedora environment. But you can modify the desktop just like you can modify it in the Windows. You change how the dock is displayed, how large the icons are. Maybe you'll change the background, modify the regional location, any of those kinds of things. Logging out is relatively straightforward. We'll take a look at all those things. You go to the power button and try to log out. Users, power down. This is where we really want to be at, the command line, right? So we will dive into this in a little more depth when we come back. So let me know if you guys have questions and such, and try to make some of those questions. See about stop sharing. All right, yeah, cool. So I'm plug in some of this info, and then we'll be right back. So let's see.